Usually I feel that in the US, we have this attitude that the accentedness is a problem for the speaker to
Right,
resolve,
not the listener.
not the listener. Yeah. And so it's really missing half of the piece of conversations and interactions, which involves two stakeholders, both the speaker and the listener equally.
Yeah. Welcome to the Onward Podcast. This is your host, Emily Harmon. The Onward Podcast features authentic conversations on facing adversity, moving forward, and discovering ourselves along the way. This is a unique episode because in this episode, I'm talking to Carey Bellino, and we're talking about the skills needed in today's global market, skills needed to foster meaningful communication with multilingual teams. We talk about the benefits of clear communication and the importance of avoiding the cost of miscommunication, especially in global companies. English language learners that work in a company where English is the primary language spoken can sometimes feel left out, can feel misunderstood. And it's really the role of both the communicator and the listener to make sure that the communication is effective. And we talk about that in this interview. Carey is an American English accent and communication coach. We conducted this interview live back in February of 2021, and I'm now publishing it as a regular Onward Podcast episode. So during the interview, you'll hear me call out some of the guest names and read some of their questions. So let's cut to the interview. And if you listen to the end, you'll hear a special surprise that I share about the relationship between me and my guest, Carey. Hi, Carey. Welcome to the Onward Podcast.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about communication and the English language. And I've got my phone here because I'm going to read a little bit about your background. You're an American English accent and communication coach. And it's so cool. Your company name is Upward, and mine, this podcast, is Onward. So you're the owner of Upward Communication, and you apply methods from your background, which is in speech language pathology, to help people produce sounds and intonation of the American English communication style. And you use evidence from research in the areas of adult learning, language, neuroscience, social cognition, and counseling to guide your clients toward their goals of being more effective communicators. Can you explain that for me?
Sure. So
exactly what you do.
Yeah. So my background is as a speech language pathologist, and my current area of focus is helping English language learners to use the American English style of communicating more effectively to meet their goals, whether it's a social goal they have and they want to improve their quality of life or the relationships in their lives, or oftentimes at work, they need to communicate more effectively to get a job they want, maybe their dream job, or maybe they just want to get their next promotion or advance their careers in some way. And so because speech language pathologists study communication, I am positioned in a nice place to help people who are learning English achieve some of those goals. So we study just typical language development, disordered language from, a medical condition like a stroke or a brain injury, as well as language differences. So an accent would fall under a difference. It's not considered a pathological concern. It's not a medical problem, but there are just different ways of speaking, and those could be regional or foreign accents. And so I mostly work with people who have foreign accents, and I'll speak to that tonight. But I should also mention that regional accents kind of fall under this umbrella as well.
Okay, wow, interesting. So, the Onward Podcast is all about facing adversity and moving forward. And it sounds like that's what you do. You help people who face adversity, which is the adversity of how they speak, how they communicate. And I know because I've interviewed a woman very early in the Onward Podcast days when I was interviewing, who came over to the United States from China, and just the challenges she had because she had an accent. She's very well educated. She's smart. But I think sometimes people tend to have a bias and maybe assume that somebody's not that smart because their English isn't proper. Is that what you run into?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. So I think overall, I would say the goal of accent modification is really to help improve just effective communication, right? Good communication is universal and it's a life skill that benefits us all. And it's really about connecting with people. So I think it is challenging when somebody has learned a second language to then use that in a way that they feel represents their level of experience and expertise and professionalism. And so, unfortunately, they do often face biases. And this is a topic that's come up recently because, with the affairs in the United States, trying to make progress with diversity and inclusion, and this concept falls under that a little bit, and it's hard to completely separate it out. So the intent with accent modification or accent coaching is really to work on effective communication that sounds more natural in American English rather than necessarily making somebody sound American or sound like a native. And I think initially when the field was developed, that was the goal. And oftentimes our clients will say that that's their goal, and we try to emphasize that the real goal is helping them communicate better. And we've probably all met people who have accented speech in our life, but we can understand them pretty well. Yeah. So accentedness isn't the only component to communication that's effective as an English language learner. There's other pieces to it, like comprehensibility. How easy is it for the listener to understand? And some of those other aspects maybe even play a bigger role than the accentedness.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I can remember, I've had instances where I've been talking to somebody that has a little bit of an accent, and if you're discussing something that's complex already, that requires you to really think hard in the discussion, and then the accent is a little different, or maybe not the accent, but the communication skills are a little different, that makes it even harder to communicate on a tough subject. And hi, Stephanie, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. I often think of teachers or professors who have come to the United States from another country, and they have a teaching assistantship, and they're teaching either an undergraduate or graduate course. And these students may significantly judge these speakers as being difficult to understand, that they're not getting everything they can out of their course, and feel frustrated. But I think, if we stop and think about the work that these professors have done to learn another language, come into another country and teach, do public speaking essentially in front of a large group, it's pretty challenging. Yeah. And so I think there is an opportunity for speech pathologists working in this area, and maybe even ESL educators, to talk more about listener bias, because I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. Usually I feel that in the US, we have this attitude that the accentedness is a problem for the speaker.
Right, not the listener.
Not the listener. Yeah, and so it's really missing half of the piece of conversations and interactions, which involves two stakeholders, both the speaker and the listener equally. Yeah. And they both have responsibilities to make the interaction successful.
So Stephanie says, I tell my students not to worry about their accent as long as others can understand them.
Yes.
And Deb says, I had to work on this learning Arabic while living and working in Egypt. Wow, that's awesome, Deb. How many of us have ever gone to a different country to try to work over there and to communicate and to make a living in another country where you have to speak something completely different language?
Yeah, it's courageous and challenging. And I think that piece is often lost in the frustration when there are miscommunications, which is unfortunate, because I think those people who are coming over have such a gift to give us in terms of their perspective on different cultures and the experience of learning language. And
so why did you get into this career field?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'm from a rural part of Massachusetts, which is beautiful, but not very diverse. And my first opportunity to really experience diversity was on an exchange trip that I took in 5th grade to Mexico City. And it was really eye-opening. I ended up loving the experience, but initially it was extremely challenging. And I think that did spark an interest for other cultures and learning more about different languages and ways of living that were different from my own. And that led to other interactions with people who were exchange students at my high school from Brazil, Japan, Finland, and these different cultures that were just so fascinating to me. And in my undergraduate studies, I had an opportunity to work in our department on a program that we called the International Teaching Assistants, the ITA program. And that was a program designed to help foreign graduate students who were teaching undergraduate courses to improve their English proficiency. And the speech language pathology department worked on that to help work with individuals and in groups, because people were presenting to a classroom, so they needed to actually practice in groups. Mm-hmm. And I had a great time doing that and learning, again, more about the world and these diverse places to live and diverse cultures. And then in my graduate program, I sought out another opportunity to work within that same program. And I think it was a challenge for me because most of my classmates were pursuing more traditional speech language pathology roles. So working at a hospital or a school setting that was more medical based, which is a large part of the field and an important part. And I ended up kind of shifting gears to work with brain injury for many years. But my real interest has always been working with English language learners, helping them improve their English. That kind of started through all of these different experiences, when I had a chance to go to Mexico and then in my undergraduate studies. And I should actually, I can't believe I forgot this, but I had a chance to study abroad in Italy. And then I stayed there longer than my semester abroad. And for me, trying to work on my own accent was also a piece of this puzzle. Mm-hmm. And I remember when my language was more proficient and some of the local people wouldn't try to speak in English when I spoke Italian. And I took some chances and tried to use the regional dialects there. And I felt so great being able to communicate with them. And it was still a challenge for me, but I just really took the opportunity to dive in and give it a try. And I think that helped. Yeah. And so I think all of those together all of those experiences stayed with me. And I did my work with brain injury and then had this opportunity to start my own business. And here I am.
There you are. So I think it's so cool to see how somebody's background and their past has led to what they work on. Let's see what some of the comments are. So Stephanie says, I've lived in Eastern Europe for 2 years. And she says it's helped her be more compassionate towards English language learners. And she hopes to visit Italy one day. Do you know Stephanie? I don't know.
I do. Yes. Thanks for engaging, Stephanie.
That's Stephanie. Carey and I have a little secret we'll share at the end of this interview. We won't share it now, but we have a little prize for everybody who sticks to the end. So thank you, Stephanie, for your comments. So yeah, that's awesome, Carey. All the different opportunities you had to travel abroad and to see what it's like. And now you're turning that, what you saw was a challenge for you and a challenge for other people into helping. So companies come and work with you, or would it be individuals, or who would be working with you and your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. It could be either. So most often it's individuals who are motivated to improve their communication. And most of the time for me and my clients, it is because they are wanting to advance their careers. Again, whether it's to just get a new job, maybe at a company that they've dreamed about, or a new position within their company, and the interview process is challenging. It could be people who have received poor performance reviews who want to improve, and maybe they're receiving feedback from their peers or their supervisors that communication is a challenge. And it could be, again, somebody who just wants to make new friends in this.
That seems one way, because then you're helping them, but you're not able to help the listener.
Exactly. I know. So maybe I'll circle back to that, if we can, to the listener bias piece.
Yeah.
Just to finish answering your question. Then there's the corporate side where I might work with somebody in human resources or collaborate with diversity and inclusion specialists. This is an area that gets a little tricky because some companies are aware of the litigious nature of our of our culture. And so I think those relationships tend to work best when the employee advocates to the employer, saying that they would like to find a class or a service that could help them improve their communication at work. And then they can work with the employer. And I think in general as well, just with principles of adult learning, people make the most progress when they're motivated themselves. And so when it's initiated by the person who actually wants to make the improvement, outcomes tend to be better. But you're right. So going back to the listener bias piece, I think there is, again, a big opportunity for us who are working in this field to help maybe educate and counsel and train the individuals we work with and employers on this idea of listener bias. So for the individuals, we might increase their awareness that this is something they may face, and they've probably already faced it and have examples that they could share with us. But then taking it a step further and saying, well, here's how you could address the issue, or here's how you can advocate in this situation, so that they feel that they can recognize it when it's happening and then maybe have a way to work around it to still make their communication successful and achieve the goal that both the speaker and the listener need to arrive at.
Your experience, what are the typical responses when somebody who is the person that has the person from a different country, right? Mm-hmm. Someone from a different country in the US approaching their supervisor or somebody at work about the fact that perhaps they have listener bias? How well does that go over? I mean, I don't know that would go over too well.
I think there needs to be some tact involved. And so talking about calling somebody out versus calling somebody in. So maybe they could have a conversation with their supervisor and kind of call them in, where it's a more collaborative conversation, one-to-one, more discreet, less pointed. Whereas when they're calling somebody out, I think the person there, who maybe has the listener bias might feel more defensive.
Right.
And I think in that case, you would have a bigger challenge arriving at a solution. And so I think calling somebody in is a little bit more solution focused and collaborative and might yield a better outcome. But I do think it still is a challenge. And especially if it's a superior that you're addressing.
Right.
And giving them feedback. I think there's a lot of interesting things that are kind of in this cursory conversation for my field anyway, as far as listener bias, where we might be able to help employers train employees who work with individuals from across the world or who may have language differences from learning English in areas like kind of listener training, and they maybe try a listening lab where the employees have an opportunity to listen to different accents and process that and think about that. Self-assessments where the listeners are asking themselves tough questions about their internal dialogue, and if they are feeling negative about a person or a situation because of the difficulty communicating. And if so, where is that judgment coming from? What's the source? And really trying to take some ownership and recognize when they might start to have those judgments and see if we can maybe train them to self-manage and, be more open-minded and empathetic in the situation.
It's just really interesting, Carey, because I used to work in the Navy, and we had a lot of diversity inclusion events and days where we learned maybe about celebrating Native Americans, or it's more like celebrating the culture, but it's not. I don't ever remember discussing this and discussing listener bias. And I have a couple of friends that work in that field. I'm going to connect you with them because they work in like the diversity and inclusion field. And I don't know if this is something that they cover in what they do.
It's possible. I do think it tends to get missed. I feel like it is more of a newer topic. It's an old problem, but a newer topic that we're acknowledging and managing. And I think the intent behind the accent modification field for speech pathologists is that we're helping people to use the skills they've already learned in English, fine-tune them a little bit so they're more proficient in them, so they don't feel that they're being held back or excluded undervalued. And, there's a lot of the emotional piece that I think is a driving factor for them to want to improve. And so there's a need for my field, but finding a way to balance the need and also making it feel that we're providing support so that they feel included, and employers are, creating more diverse workplaces with opportunities for English language learners to grow into maybe leadership positions and empower them to feel that they can speak up at a meeting and be heard.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at what you said, you typed here, like having an accent isn't a problem, but really feeling insecure about how you speak or being left out of a conversation is. And that definitely is. And I see that. And then what did you want to talk about avoiding the cost of miscommunication in global companies?
Yeah, so I think, right now we are kind of forced into communicating in different patterns with COVID and everything being remote in terms of work. But, I think companies that are, so I think we've all had to experience shifting our communication styles a little bit this past year, whether it's been with friends, family, and work environments. And so I think it's a nice opportunity to talk about how communication is kind of this universal life skill that we all need, and it significantly impacts employers. And oftentimes we'll think about the monetary impact of communication or miscommunication. And so I think this is true regardless of whether you're talking about a population of people who have accented speech or challenges speaking, but just communication in general, whether it's, the same language. And there's a lot of research talking about how miscommunication leads to incomplete projects, right? So I think 1 out of 3 projects don't get completed because of errors with communication or a delay in communication, and maybe people miss a deadline. And large companies have been found to lose, I think it was $62 million in a recent study. And then for smaller companies, maybe $100,000, again, due to miscommunication. And so I think communication and productivity go hand in hand. And oftentimes when there's an English language learner, we feel that there needs to be extra, or not needs to be, but there's often extra time required for repetition of an idea or solving kind of these breakdowns in communication that are these disconnects where the speaker and listener aren't quite on the same page. And so I think some of that time is lost, right? And that comes to a cost for the employer as well. And then just satisfaction for employees who are English language learners as well. I think they often feel excluded.
Yeah.
And socially, I think it's hard. So their morale may be low, and maybe they are an expert in their field, but having a hard time demonstrating that through clear communication. And, that doesn't make their work enjoyable and leads to feeling that they aren't quite respected, or that, and oftentimes I've heard this, that people I work with will say they don't feel that coworkers find them as intelligent as the speaker or the language learner feels they are. And they think, in their native language, they would be able to communicate this idea very clearly. But in English, it's just more challenging because this is a language that they've learned and they're still learning. And so that's big, in that.
I can definitely see that. I mean, I've worked with people that don't speak English as the first language, and I've caught myself thinking that they don't understand, or maybe they're not as intelligent. And it's not, I've been able to catch myself and correct myself, but I mean, it's just, I've thought that, I'll admit it.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably a lot of us have. And yeah, it's not right. And when you look at the amount of money it takes to hire somebody and to bring them on board and to lose them over this, especially if they're really intelligent, good employee, have a lot of expertise, that's not good for companies. And I think with people moving around more, especially after COVID, we're going to have maybe even more diversity in our workforce, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think the world has gotten smaller with COVID and everything being remote, and all of us having to adapt so quickly to this new style of communicating. And it opens a lot of doors for people in different parts of the world to take on jobs in different countries, which is really exciting. And I think it gives employers more well-rounded experience and perspective, and with all of these diverse people, we have diverse ways of thinking and doing and being, and we can all learn from that.
What would you recommend to an employer who's bringing on board a diverse group of people that may not speak English as a first language? How would you recommend an employer prepare the supervisors and other employees to interact?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think offering some education and training to the upper management would be helpful. So again, diversity and inclusion training, but also something that surrounds communication and can support that piece as well. And, there's so many pieces that could be included in that. And one thing that jumps out to me that I think circles back to the podcast you mentioned that you did with, was it Yu Fang?
Yes, and she changed her name to May.
Yes, so that was going to be my comment, is making an effort, a good faith effort to learn how to pronounce somebody's name is important and goes a long way in making them feel included and valued. And I think it's up to individuals whether they take an American name or keep their given name. And, I think ultimately they can make that choice for themselves. But I think it would be nice if they could go into an employer or their workplace and feel that they don't have to change their name. So again, thinking about communication being balanced, there are things that the speaker can do and things that the listener can do. So I think a small skill that could be added to a training targets this, where maybe we teach the upper management to really model that and demonstrate what does that look like when you're trying to pronounce somebody's name correctly. And so avoiding the phrases like, your name is really hard to pronounce, is where it kind of puts the problem again on that person who's the English language learner. And rather the employer or upper management could say, this is a new name. I haven't seen this before. Let's talk about how you pronounce it so that I can pronounce it correctly when we're at team meetings. And there's a lot of different strategies that could be included under that umbrella. But I do think just something as small as making an effort to pronounce somebody's name correctly goes a long way. And I think there's a lot of employees who are here and have taken American names. And again, if they feel comfortable with that and that's working for them, that's fine. But I also feel that the person who is the English language learner could advocate and say, well, actually, why don't you try to say my name like this, or it rhymes with that, and let me say it slowly for you. There's a lot of things they could do as well to help their coworkers maybe pronounce their names correctly too. So again, this idea of balancing responsibilities between the speaker and the listener is really important for pretty much any piece of communication, any skill within the umbrella of communication.
Yeah, this is Yao Fang's episode here.
Oh, great.
I love it. Learning helped me move forward as an immigrant. You could search for it on Apple Podcasts, but yeah. And she was advised to change her name.
She was, okay.
But
she may have mentioned that. It was an interesting episode.
Yeah, you listened to it. Yeah, I think
I did. Yeah,
you might have mentioned it. I'm not sure. We have some comments here, but yeah, it's that's really interesting because that happens also with African Americans as well. And people have a hard time sometimes pronouncing their name and then make it like it's that person's fault when really it's on us to be able to pronounce their name. I've been there. All right, let's see. We have some comments here. Deb says, is there an added bias for female English learners? So many studies on men versus women speaking in meetings.
Yes, I would say yes to this. I think most often the research that I've read is within English speakers, native English speakers, but I have read a little bit where this is another layer to that or another level. So yeah, I think that's another challenge that females face when learning another language and working or living in another culture. Yeah.
Here's another question. I don't know who wrote it but it says someone from LinkedIn. This is an interesting topic. I feel so blessed that as a bilingual Hispanic, I grew up around people with heavy foreign accents. And as a Navy wife who've moved all over with my husband, that placed me around people from various cultures with heavy accents and English not being their first language. It has helped me to be a better employer and boss. And it's also helped me recognize if someone is having any hesitancy or reservation in their communication, as well as helping navigate situations where, and I can't see the whole thing, but yeah,
Okay.
that experience
Yeah,
traveling around, definitely helpful.
it is. And I do think that for people who have that experience, that impacts, that listener bias significantly. So if we are exposed to a lot of different languages and accents and different patterns of speaking, that helps us when we do encounter somebody we've maybe never met before, because we can use that information to process the language and move the communication interaction forward. So that's another piece that could be involved in employer orientation and training, is recognizing, what is my experience with learning languages and listening to languages? Because if it's very limited, then that may impact my bias more than somebody who has exposure to different patterns of speaking. And so I think that is good for us to recognize.
Yeah, that's a good point. Someone says, I say to people, out of respect for you, please tell me the proper pronunciation of your name. I mean, I worked in the Navy for 38 years. I never remember getting any training on this, no discussion of this. And I mean, I don't know if that's the case, if people watching want to comment if they've had any training on it, but I definitely think it's needed as we move. We have a global economy right now.
Yeah, we do. And English, I think, is the international language of business. So I feel like it's important for us, for me in my role, or English ESL teachers, to help kind of build this awareness and work on some of these skills, because I do think it's sort of cursory. We're acknowledging them now. Again, they're old problems, but I think that they still need to come to the surface, and we need to think about how we can manage them better so that we are being more respectful and inclusive and empowering people.
Carey, did I cover everything that we were going to cover? I mean, like I said, this podcast is on facing adversity and moving forward. And I know we're not necessarily talking about adversity you face, but we're talking about how you help people that are facing adversity. And I think that that's really why I want to broadcast this on LinkedIn, because so many people on LinkedIn are employers, and I hope we can share this, and I hope more people can watch it and think to themselves, wow, I haven't covered this in my company, or I have covered it, or whatever. So, yeah. So did I cover everything there?
I think so. Yeah, unless there are other questions, I think we covered everything we mentioned we would. But, I think overall, the takeaways are to be empathetic and more understanding when we are interacting with people who have learned a second or third language. I know in the US, we often say English as a second language, but many of these people may have already learned numerous other languages, and English might be their fifth language. And so finding ways to recognize our biases and be respectful and supportive and empower them.
So Carey and I are going to share a little secret. We're cousins, right?
We are cousins, yes.
Carey, thank you for sharing this important topic. I'm going to connect you with a few people that I know that work in the field of diversity and inclusion, because maybe you can help them out. One of my friends is Adrienne Somerville, and she's getting ready to have a book come out on the topic. So,
great. Yeah, I'm happy to collaborate. Hopefully everyone who is watching or who's listening got something out of it, and it was great to chat with you today.
Yeah, and share what you got out of it with other employers too, because this is definitely a topic that needs to get around. Thank you for listening today. I can't believe it's been over 2 years that I've been publishing this Onward podcast. I have not missed an episode. I've published one episode a week, sometimes two, but at least one a week every Monday. And I just want to say, I'm really proud of myself for that. A lot of people, when they publish podcasts, they stop after 7 episodes or so. And I think I've got about 140 episodes out there that you can listen to. If you like the Onward podcast, please recommend it to a friend, and please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people find the show. I would greatly appreciate that. I hope you're enjoying the summer. I've been enjoying learning new things. I've been learning Tai Chi. I've started to take guitar lessons, and I'm enrolled in a couple of coaching certification programs. I really love coaching. I love working with my clients and seeing them put the effort into themselves and just seeing the transformation. It's just awesome. If you want to learn more about my coaching services, you can go to my website, emilyharmon.com. And you can also schedule a complimentary call with me from my website, and we can just have a chat, get to know each other, and see if we agree that we're a good fit to enter into a coaching relationship. And if not, that's fine too. At least we get to meet and talk with each other, and I get to meet more of my Onward podcast listeners. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.
Yesterday.